Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. God has given us unlimited treasures in His Word. Every time we open it, we can discover a new treasure or admire an old one. What will we find today? Here's Carla Early with Treasure Hunt in the Word.
When my daughter was little, she was the only toddler in the nursery at church. She had the whole place to herself. That became a problem when another child came as a visitor. Then I saw my normally sweet little daughter get pretty nasty. When I heard one of the teachers tell her, "You've got to share your toys," and she yelled, "Mine!" It suddenly hit me what the problem was. She thought they were her toys, but she didn't believe that those interlopers had any right to her toys. She didn't know what the word share meant, but she sure knew what the word mine meant. I sat her down and told her that these toys at church were not hers. They were God's, and God wanted all the children to be able to play with the toys, not just her. Who says you can't reason with a 2-year-old? She got it. I can't say she was incredibly happy about it, but she did understand. I think she had the same problem that many of the Jews had back in the book of Acts. To them, God was their God. He had chosen Abraham and his family, the Jews, to be his people. He separated them from all the other nations and gave them the law. For them, the Gentiles were unclean, idolatrous people that they needed to stay away from. Throughout the Old Testament, it was very much an us against them mentality. Yet God made it known to them that He was the God of all nations. As far back as Genesis, the first time God spoke to Abraham, He promised, "In you all the families of the earth will be blessed." In Isaiah 61, the Lord portrays Israel as a firstborn son, with a double portion of inheritance. He also calls them priests of the Lord, so they were to be to the human race as the Levites were to them, teachers, intercessors, letting the world know who God is. Isaiah actually emphasized God's love for all the world and Israel's place in His plan. He says through them He would bring the Messiah. He would open the eyes of the blind, free the captives, and be a light to the Gentiles. So His salvation would reach the ends of the earth. Yes, the Israelites were chosen, but not just to have their own cozy relationship with God. They were to share Him with the rest of us. When Paul shared this verse from Isaiah 49:6 with the synagogue in Antioch and Pisidia, he reminded them of their special relationship as God's chosen people to reach the world. Not that this was an easy thing for them to accept. It had been us against them so long, it would be hard to change that worldview. Even though Jesus had ministered to the Gentiles and quoted several of the Isaiah passages and told them to go into all the world and preach to every nation, even the disciples had a hard time accepting the idea of Gentile Christians. The Holy Spirit had to convince them. Even after that, they had a hard time knowing how to treat them. It was pretty tough at first. No wonder unbelieving Jews found it hard to stomach. Often, they listened to the gospel until Paul would mention that the Gentiles were included. Then they'd go off the deep end. In the synagogue in Antioch and Pisidia, when Paul invited the Gentiles to come to Christ, we see this problem pretty plainly. Acts 13:48-50 says, "When the Gentiles heard this, they were glad and glorified the word of the Lord and believed. And the word spread through all the region. But the Jews raised up persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from the region." From the Gentiles' view, this was pretty fantastic. But the Jews couldn't stand the thought. As Paul told the Romans later, salvation for the Gentiles provoked the Jews to jealousy. God is our God. We don't want to share. Did Paul and Barnabas let this discourage them? They did what Jesus told His disciples to do when He sent them out 2 by 2. They shook the dust off their feet and went to another town, Iconium. And the chapter ends on a high. It says the disciples were filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit. We may also have some sort of prejudice when it comes to the gospel, whether it's conscious or subconscious. So that's one thing we all need to be careful about. But when we share the gospel, we also have to be careful that a negative reaction doesn't dampen our enthusiasm for sharing the gospel again. We never know what seeds may have been planted that God will grow later. So we can always leave the encounter with joy and anticipate what God will do next.
You can contact us at treasurehuntingtheword@gmail.com. We'd love to hear the treasures God has given you through His Word. You can listen to other episodes at our website, which you can find in the description below. Thanks for listening, and remember, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.